Hello everyone, you're watching Variety Television and welcome to another Pikmin theory. Rather than start this one like I normally do with announcements, I think it's best we just go ahead and get started with this one, as this video is meant to serve as a full comprehensive guide to my latest and most ambitious theory, the Onion Theory. I've been covering this one across a few videos lately, but since then I found some new pieces of evidence and I also thought it would be worth it to condense everything down to one video with all of the pieces of evidence in one place. The goal is to have a clear communication of why I think the onions are not only very intelligent, but also the cause of all the crashes, as well as the reason many other things are the way they are within the Pikmin universe. I personally feel like I have several examples of evidence throughout the entire series, so what I'll do is start with Pikmin 1 and go from there. The very first piece of evidence we see is with the opening cutscene. As Olimar passes PNF 404, a meteoroid approaches his ship. It seems he is busy making tea at the time, but nevertheless his Nova Blaster never activates, causing his ship to be struck and then pulled in by the planet's natural gravity. However, we know that the tea isn't the only cause, as the Olimar trophy from Melee also discusses a ship malfunction, which I believe is referencing the Nova Blaster. At this point I would like to give a huge shout out to Flamsey, a fellow Pikmin creator, because without his discussions and help this video would have been a lot harder to make. It is because of him that I am even aware of the manual or the Olimar trophy to begin with. Also, I know from previous videos covering this that some of you think that Olimar simply doesn't know what his ship parts do and was tricked by the brochure. While we do have examples of this with the extraordinary bolt, we also know that Olimar has a history as a repairman before he captained his own ship, letting us know that he does have a decent understanding of how these things work. He was just tricked by a slick salesman with the extraordinary bolt. Olimar obviously survives the crash, but when he comes to, he finds himself directly beside a red onion. When he approaches, the onion activates. Upon the activation, we get our first clue towards the theory, Olimar's first monologue, where he states that he feels as though the onion was waiting for him. This is also of note because we don't see the onion activate until Olimar draws near, which lets us know that it could indeed sense his presence. After this happens, the onion drops a seed, and Olimar states that he even feels if the Pikmin sprout itself is calling to him. To continue the idea that the onion and Pikmin were waiting for him, Olimar himself wonders if the Pikmin were just waiting to use him or an alien brain like him to help climb the natural order. This is important because it is reiterated nearly word for word by Olimar in Pikmin 4, and something very similar is said by Alph in Pikmin 3. But we'll address those when we reach those games. Another major part of the onion theory is that the onions and Pikmin are able to have some sort of influence on the captains themselves. There are many pieces of evidence for this throughout the series, but the first one comes from entry number 9 in Pikmin 1. Here we clearly see Olimar starting to consider attempting to leave without all of his ship parts. While we know that some parts are in fact optional, the way he ends his sentence by saying, "a daydream," seems to imply he's referring to more important parts, or else it wouldn't seem that far-fetched to him. And I'm sure many of you are already fully aware of the bad ending from Pikmin 1, but during this cutscene we see exactly what happens when Olimar tries to leave without all of his ship parts. Not only that, but we see the idea of a Leafling, or a Pikmin captain type creature, was something that they had planned from the start, albeit very different in design from Pikmin 4's version. Depending on how you view the timeline, this could be the first stage of the Leafling's evolution through the series, finally being perfected by Pikmin 4, or if you're like me and think this is an alternate telling of the first game's story, then it would just be that the initial Leafling idea was reworked to be more important to the story. No matter what you believe about the timeline, it's clear that this form of Olimar from Pikmin 1 now has a leaf and is living with no helmet, and he's meant to serve the same purpose to the Pikmin as any other Leafling, a permanent captain. If you were to ask me, Olimar having those thoughts of not needing all of his ship parts is the onion intruding his mind and attempting to start the Leaflingification process. Entry number 24 furthers this idea. which is another major point of the theory, that the onions strive to make permanent leaders for their Pikmin. I will discuss why I think onions actually can influence people's minds later in the video, as a bulk of the evidence for this is found in Pikmin 4. My final piece of evidence for the onion theory in Pikmin 1 is an unused quote from Olimar that appears in Pikmin's code. It reappears in Pikmin 4. I am so very tired. This text isn't used in the final version of Pikmin 4, but it appears to have been planned to be used if the player fails to leave the planet, tying this quote to the bad ending of the game where Olimar becomes a Leafling. And like I said, we see this quote again in Pikmin 4 after Olimar has become a Leafling. And to address the Bozu in the room, the entry we see on the Gulix here in Pikmin 1 says nothing at all about being drawn in, feeling strange, or literally anything beyond it being a cell with 2 nuclei. It is simply a giant cell and nothing more. So far in Pikmin 1 alone, we have established the idea of ship parts not working as intended near the planet, feelings of being waited for, drawn in, and even being used by the onions and Pikmin. We see the ideas of the Pikmin and onions altering Olimar's mind state, making him think that he can leave without all of his parts, or even that he wishes he was a Pikmin himself. We've also established the idea that Leaflings were absolutely something Miyamoto had in mind all the way back in Pikmin 1, down to a direct quote that's unused in Pikmin 1, but reused in Pikmin 4. Since Pikmin 1, Miyamoto had an idea of the onion making permanent and leafy leaders for their Pikmin. This about covers everything from Pikmin 1, so let's move on to Pikmin 2. At the very start of Pikmin 2, we see our first sign of greater intelligence from the onions. Set aside how the onions sense people are nearby, know to limit Pikmin on the field, and how the Pikmin always know where to go if a path is available, as well as which onion to go to, we see even higher signs of intelligence, signs of actual thought. We see Olimar clip a tree while landing, possibly due to the Hakatate ship's poor condition, separating him from Louie. Somehow, Olimar lands with a group of red Pikmin, and Louie lands with the red onion. We see the onion is already active, which is interesting in its own regard, and the Pikmin have been separated from their onion. The onion sprouts a brand new seed for Louie, despite 5 Pikmin already being on the field. It's very evident that the onion not only knows Louie is there to release the seed in the first place, but it also somehow knows Louie will need a Pikmin to reunite with Olimar and the other Pikmin. If this isn't a sign of intelligent thought from the onion, then I don't know what is, as we usually only see the onion drop a seed if it's dormant or there's a Pikmin extinction. Pikmin 2 doesn't offer much more than this for evidence, but we can take a look at the water Wraith from Pikmin 2 and see if it has anything to offer us to explain why ships seem to crash in Pikmin, or even if there is a connection to the famous Bozu theory. Starting with the Piclopedia entry from Olimar, we see that the water Wraith seems to be some sort of ultra-dimensional being, which instills fear in those who see it. Olimar also describes the Wraith as looking like candy. I think we get all the clues we need from taking a look at the original name of this creature, as well as the clues from the Piclopedia entry we just looked at. The creature's name in Japanese is pronounced Bozu, which seems to be a play on the words amoeba, a type of microscopic and amorphous organism, and bozu, a Japanese word with 4 known meanings. One definition of the word means to come back empty-handed from fishing, while another definition of the word is a way of referring to a group of guys or boys. A third definition refers to a type of monk, and the fourth and most common use of the word refers to a type of shaved head hairstyle. The monk definition also relates to the hairstyle definition, as monks typically have a similar type of hairstyle. It's also said that the fishing definition originates from the hairstyle definition, with the connection between the two being the metaphor of no hair or no fish. Clearly, this word, Bozu, sounds like the word Bozu, but the Wraith doesn't appear to be a sea spirit whatsoever. Even the name seems to refer to him as being an amoeba with a shaved head. If you look closely at the first part of the word, ame, in this spelling it actually means candy. And the second part, bozu, as we discussed, typically refers to a shaved head hairstyle. Its name seems to be referencing its candy-like appearance with the use of ame here. With the other meaning of ame, rain, which is spelled this way, is not used in the name of the water Wraith. The most literal translation we can get here is Candy Shaved Head. Olimar directly refers to this creature as looking like candy. It obviously looks like it has a shaved head, and clearly that was the intention with the naming of this creature. Any tie to Umibozu is likely coincidental or merely a reference. To further this tie to the Water Wraith and Candy, nearly every treasure collected in its Pikmin 2 location, the Submerged Castle, is a candy or a treat of some kind. 9 out of the 13 treasures, in fact. Depending on what version of the game you're playing, that number can actually be higher. The Water Wraith, or Amiibozu, is just an amorphous candy man with a shaved head. And in case you couldn't tell by its Piclopedia entry, none of this implies that the Water Wraith crashes ships. Is it a weird, creepy, ultra-dimensional being? Yes, absolutely. But it also has no evidence suggesting that it could be behind the shipwrecks or other events we see throughout Pikmin and Pikmin 2. Also, seeing as how the Gulix is a dual nuclei cell, and the Water Wraith is an ultra-dimensional Candyman, I really don't see the way these two are connected whatsoever. So let's move on to Pikmin 3. This one will have a bit more evidence than Pikmin 2, so I'll try to make this section more concise. Right off the bat with this game, we get some interesting clues. Immediately we see something happen to the Drake while it's still in the atmosphere, causing all 3 of the crew members on board to get flung out. While what happens is unknown, Alf states that he felt something more than just gravity pulling them in. A lot of people try to use this quote to explain how the Plasm Wraith crashes the ship, but I encourage you to take another look at this quote and read it carefully. Alf isn't referencing the cause of the crash here, he is simply stating that he felt something more than gravity when they first came in for a landing. Something mysterious happens, causing the ship to crash and the members aboard to be lost, but if we're considering a force pulling something in, why don't we also consider where the things that were being pulled in actually land? Alf lands right next to a red onion, Brittany lands right next to the cave where the rock onion is found, and Charlie lands with a group of yellow Pikmin in the area where the yellow onion is found. Just like Pikmin 2, it seems the onion somehow influenced this crash, as Alf's assistance is required to help the red Pikmin reunite with their onion. Some sort of assistance was required to free the rock Pikmin from the grasp of the enemy and free the onion, and furthermore, outside help was needed to reunite the yellow Pikmin to their onion and get the yellow onion freed from the cave. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, after Alf reunites with Brittany, he crashes once again, but Brittany somehow lands in the cave with the yellow onion, which is what allows them not only to find said onion, but to free it, find Charlie, and potentially reunite those lost yellow Pikmin, which appear to have been eaten by the time our crew actually gets to them. Another major piece of evidence, which I referred to in the Pikmin 1 section, is a quote from Alf, where he expresses an extremely similar sentiment to that of Olimar, except taking it further, stating that he feels protective over the Pikmin and wonders if they are somehow controlling the crew. These pieces of evidence paint a pretty clear picture of mysterious crashes causing people to land right next to onions that are either dormant or in need of help. After that, the people tend to feel a sense of being used or even controlled by the Pikmin. In Pikmin 1, we saw the Leafling connections and the theme of onions and Pikmin being more than what they seem permeate every entry of this franchise. Lastly, I'll address the Plasm Wraith. And I think really the only evidence I need here is Olimar's entry on the Plasm Wraith, which lays out very clearly that this enemy is not related to the Water Wraith. Olimar himself says that he thought they were related at first, but now there are enough sightings of the Plasm Wraith to dispel this theory. Even the Water Wraith has a scientific classification of Amphibios-sapiens, while the Plasm Wraith is classified as unknown. I think this entry is meant to dispel any theories that the two may be related in more ways than just name and appearance. This is most likely to let us know that the design itself was inspired by the Water Wraith, but it's not intended to be related to the Water Wraith. Finally, we will move on to Pikmin 4, where we have several more pieces of evidence to look over. Just like the other entries, we will first take a look at the shipwrecks. Once again, Olimar hits a meteoroid, and once again, his Nova Blaster apparently does nothing. The SS Shepherd has a fate very similar to the SS Drake, and something mysterious happens in the atmosphere. Shepherd, the captain of the ship, lets us know that, despite Bernard being an excellent pilot, The cause of the crash was a total mystery, yet even she feels as though something drew her here. While we're on the topic of crashes, just to show it wasn't a fluke, Jin also mentions his ship breaking down, the students Shiba and Kaya also mention a ship malfunction, and many other castaways mention their crashes, but they don't give any details. When we do get details, it seems to always be a sort of mysterious malfunction, which is my explanation for Olimar's Nova Blaster not working. The next thing to note is that every single member of our team, as well as every single castaway, once again lands in an area with an onion. Each area we explore in the game is because castaways are there, and in each of these areas, an onion and sometimes multiple onions can be found. Notably, the Gulix doesn't appear here at all, and the Fulix appears rarely. The Water Wraith appears rarely as well, and definitely not in every area. It's pretty clear that the connections between these crashes are the onions. We've touched on the fact that onions can sense people drawing near, that onions show signs of intelligence, and that the Pikmin seem to be able to communicate with their onions somehow, seemingly always knowing which onion is theirs as well as the best path to get there. Amazingly, Pikmin will redirect to longer paths if the shortest one is unavailable, and if only one path is available but blocked, the Pikmin will wait for it to be cleared. Clearly, these little guys are linked up to their onions, and their onions communicate with them all of this information. How do we know it is in fact a form of communication? Well, we have several examples for this, and I think the communication works much like the captains with their ships, as we see the SS Drake communicate directly with the Pikmin 3 crew using their antenna. The leaves of the Pikmin, the tails of the Space Dog, the antenna of the captains, and the leaves of the Leaflings all share a remarkable similarity. Not only are they all similar, but all of them emit light. The Pikmin and Space Dogs emit light from their tails and leaves when idle, and the Captain's antenna emit light constantly, but it brightens when using the whistle. These similarities do not seem coincidental to me, and seem to serve as an explanation for how the Onion and Pikmin communicate. To further prove this, we can look at the Gildamander's Piclopedia entry, where we find out it emits electromagnetic waves capable of interfering with the Onion and Pikmin. If the Pikmin and onions worked off of something else, like pheromones for example, I really don't see how electromagnetic waves would interfere with them. As a matter of fact, I think Pikmin and onions replicate real-life biology and use electromagnetic waves themselves. According to the University of Rhode Island, quote, natural electromagnetic fields, or EMFs, provide ecologically important cues to marine animals in a variety of ways, i.e., the location of important resources, predator-prey interactions, communication, and finding mates. Obviously, we aren't told this directly, but it makes perfect sense considering the Gildamander emits electromagnetic waves of its own to disrupt the onions and Pikmin. The electromagnetic waves can be used to communicate, find resources, inform predator-prey interactions, and find mates. These traits are remarkably similar to traits we see in the onions and Pikmin. Pikmin 4 also shows us other ways that the onions can apparently influence things. They can enforce multiple limitations on a leader in their area, only allowing 3 Pikmin types at a time and even controlling how many are there. You can go into any cave and break these rules, but the moment you return to the surface, these rules are reinforced. The onion forces you to select 3 types and drops your limit to whatever its max is, and the other Pikmin literally cannot leave your ship pod, only being allowed to return to the onion. The onions can influence these aspects, sure, but this also tells us that the onions can sense what type of Pikmin are in their radius, even if you found those Pikmin in a cave, and that the onions always know how many Pikmin are in their radius, even if you found more Pikmin in a cave. This also tracks with the electromagnetic waves idea, as the Earth is too dense to allow waves to pass through it. However, the waves can travel through certain solid objects, explaining why the onion's influence doesn't apply underground, but it does apply above ground. Next up, let's talk about how the onions influence people's minds, as the best piece of evidence for this comes from Pikmin 4 with the Sage Leaf. We've already established that the onion could be behind some intrusive thoughts, such as Olimar's ideas of taking off in an incomplete ship, Olimar and Alf's feelings of being controlled and used, as well as Olimar's moment of even feeling like he wishes he was a Pikmin. In Pikmin 4, we see that every Leafling is fully taken over by the Onion and serves as a full-time leader for their group of Pikmin. What's interesting about this bit is the fact that the Sage Leaf refers to Pikmin and Onions as Pikmin and Onions, and he even references Ochi by name. While the Ochi bit may be negligible, no character ever tells him the name of Ochi. Also, Olimar is the one credited as naming the Pikmin, and the Sage Leaf has been stuck in this cave, having never met Olimar. It's pretty obvious that the Sage Leaf has been in this cave for an extremely long time, with his specific cave being even more time warpy than any other cave. Typically, time on the surface is 1/6 the time spent in a cave, but the Sage's cave causes a full day to pass no matter how much time is spent in there. This makes it difficult to create a timeline for his crash, but it's not that difficult to prove that Olimar and the Sage never met. The Sage has a purple onion and a white onion as part of his trial, and he also references training somebody before us a long time ago. We know that he is not referring to Olimar because in Olimar's entries for purple and white Pikmin in Pikmin 4, he states that white and purple Pikmin only come from their respective candy pop buds, but there may be onions lost someplace ancient. This tells us a lot, actually. Olimar never met the Sage, yet the Sage calls Pikmin and Onions by the names Olimar came up with. The only explanation I can think of is that the Onions influence their own names as well as the names of the Pikmin. This would perfectly explain why both Olimar and the Sage call them by the same names despite never meeting each other. No matter what, there is no other way the Sage could have known these names unless the Onions communicated them to him. The reason I don't think the Onions communicated Olimar's names is the fact that the Sage Leaf has been there longer than Olimar. He very likely would have come up with his own names for these things and would have called them these names for a long time. It makes no sense for Olimar to show up after the fact, name these things Pikmin and Onions independently, and somehow a whole nother individual who was there before Olimar also comes up with the exact same names to call them. Unless, of course, the names were influenced by the Onions, the one thing that the two have in common. We've already established that the Onions have a lot of intelligence and influence, so I don't think it's that crazy of an assumption to make, especially considering pretty much nothing else will answer this question. The last thing I want to touch on is the Leaflings. We already established that this idea was set up since Pikmin 1, with the exact same "I am so very tired" quote along with the bad ending. Not only does this show us the idea of Pikmin and Onions turning people into permanent leaders has always been in place, it shows us, at least in my opinion, that Pikmin 4 and Pikmin 1 are indeed connected, most likely in an alternate timeline sense. Seeing as how that message was likely intended for the bad ending of the game and is reiterated by Olimar as a Leafling in Pikmin 4. Pikmin 1's canon ending is clearly the good ending, as that's what leads into Pikmin 2, but Pikmin 4 seems to be an alternate timeline of sorts, where the bad ending of Pikmin 1 plays out in a somewhat similar sense. Obviously, there are differences between the stories, but again, alternate timeline. All of the characters that are turned into Leaflings, including Moss and Ochi, are all figures that can serve as leaders to the Pikmin. Once a creature is leafed, they cannot leave the planet. Ever since Pikmin 1, the Onions have had this method of securing permanent leaders. Once a person is a Leafling, they become obsessed with Dandori and only strive to perfect their Dandori. Obviously, a leader with good Dandori will help their Pikmin thrive better, so I believe this mental hijacking is another part of becoming a permanent leader. And if Onions have a way of turning these different alien races into leaders for their Pikmin, surely they have a way to actually get these leaders in the first place, right? And yes they do. The Onions cause the shipwrecks using their electromagnetic waves to cause malfunctions in the ships. Either a part doesn't work, the ship breaks down, or the pilots are just barely unable to control the ship. Either way, the ships are definitely affected by these Onions. And I believe this is the mysterious force referred to throughout the games. It's commonly known that electromagnetism is capable of moving objects without even touching them. This method is likely how the captains seem to always land near an onion. So let's summarize by piecing everything together and seeing what kind of theory we have. The Onions use electromagnetic waves to cause ships to have malfunctions, ultimately leading to them crash landing on the planet. A combination of the planet's natural gravity and the Onion's electromagnetism pulls the ships and castaways in, and the castaways land near an onion. This placement is very likely intentional, as all onions have a drive to find their Pikmin a permanent leader. Once a leader is secured, they begin propagating and growing Pikmin for the onions, fulfilling their purpose as a leader. Once this is started, it seems these castaways, like Olimar for example, begin getting ideas that would seem to lead to their demise, such as taking off without all of the parts, or even just the idea of becoming a Pikmin himself. All the characters feel this feeling of being used, as Olimar and Alf come to this conclusion independently. Next, it seems the Onion's ultimate goal is to then turn the castaway or other suitable leader into a Leafling. We know from Ochi and Pikmin 4 that space dogs can undergo this change just due to exposure, but people need to be put through an Onion first. Once the process is complete, a Leafling leader is created. Their minds are hijacked to only benefit the Pikmin as an effective leader, and they become unable to leave the planet. This has always been the plan since Pikmin 1, and it's always been the Onions. Finally, before we close this thing, I'd like to address some commonly asked questions from my previous videos concerning this topic. One question is, could the Water Wraiths and Fulix in Pikmin 4 just be pieces of the Umibozu forming independently? The answer is yes, they could be, but as we just explored, there really isn't any evidence for this connection throughout the series. Another question I got a lot was, in Pikmin 1, Olimar is unconscious, as is Alf at the start of Pikmin 3, so why don't the Pikmin just make them Leaflings from the start? And believe it or not, this one is actually really easy to answer. Olimar's Onion is dormant with no Pikmin on the surface, so it's physically impossible at that point in time for him to become a Leafling. As for Alf, the Onion he lands next to is stuck, preventing him from being able to go into it in the first place, and even if it wasn't stuck, there are only 4 wild Pikmin, and castaways weigh 5 in Pikmin 3. So the Pikmin that were there wouldn't be able to carry Alf even if the Onion was free. Rather, they needed him for both. And I think that about covers the complete Onion theory. Obviously, this is just a theory and is only me trying to make sense of all of these little details in the most comprehensive way. I really do believe this one has some substance though, and it explains a lot of things from the games in a rather satisfying manner. If you enjoyed this video and watched to this point, why not consider subscribing and leaving a like? While you're at it, share this theory with somebody that you think might enjoy it, as that would help both this channel and this community grow. Thanks so much for watching. That's all I have for this episode, so stay tuned. Variety Television will be right back.